The sun hung low over the Montana plains, casting long shadows across the dusty town square. Jack, a tall and rugged lumberjack, wiped sweat from his brow and adjusted the brim of his worn hat. The auction was in full swing, a chaotic scene of shouting bidders, clanging gavel, and the smell of leather and dust. Jack had wandered here out of boredom and loneliness. Life in the forest had been quiet, maybe too quiet, and he was searching for something. He didn't know what exactly, but he felt a pull he couldn't ignore. He scanned the crowd and froze. On the auction platform stood a woman with a coarse sack over her head. No one seemed to care about her, treating her as if she were an ordinary object up for sale. Jack felt an unexpected jolt of curiosity. Who was she? Why was she here like this? The other bidders laughed and jeered. Some offered coins, but no one dared bid high. Jack's hand tightened around his pocket change. $2. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show that he was willing to care about something, someone, that no one else did. He stepped forward and called out, "I'll take her." The crowd erupted in laughter, making crude jokes, but Jack ignored it. The auctioneer, surprised by the sudden bid, pounded his gavel. "Sold," he shouted, pointing to Jack. The woman, still silent, was guided down the platform. Her steps were hesitant, yet steady, as if she had expected this moment all along. Jack felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. He led her toward his horse and wagon, careful to give her space but unwilling to let her out of sight. The townsfolk whispered behind him, some openly mocking, some curious. The woman didn't speak, but her presence seemed to fill the air with quiet intensity. Jack had never felt something like this before, an unexplainable connection to a stranger. As they rode back toward the forest, the landscape shifted from the dusty streets to towering pines, the scent of fresh wood and earth calming Jack's nerves. He glanced at her again. The sack covered her face, but he could sense her eyes studying him. He wanted to ask her name, to uncover the story hidden behind the fabric, but he resisted. Some things, he thought, needed patience. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains, leaving a soft twilight glow. Jack opened the door and led her inside. The warmth of the cabin contrasted sharply with the cold, lonely forest he had always known. He offered her a chair, and for a moment, the silence between them was heavy yet comforting. Jack looked around, thinking about how his life had changed in a single afternoon. He had paid $2 for a woman no one else seemed to care about, and somehow, that felt like the most important choice he had ever made. Tomorrow, he would finally know her story, but tonight, he simply wanted to be near her, to share the quiet, to sit together and imagine what life could be beyond the shadows of the past. In that moment, Jack realized that this mysterious woman, hidden beneath a simple sack, had already changed everything. The first night passed quietly, the kind of silence that felt both awkward and comforting. The woman sat across from Jack by the small fireplace, her hands folded in her lap, still hidden beneath the coarse sack. Jack stared at the flames, trying not to stare too directly at her, but curiosity gnawed at him. Who was she? Why had she let herself be auctioned like property? And most importantly, why did he feel such a strange pull toward her? Morning light spilled through the cabin window, painting the wooden walls in warm gold. Jack brought her breakfast, a simple meal of eggs and bread, but she refused to eat, shaking her head slightly. He understood. Trust was something she didn't yet have, and he couldn't blame her. He ate slowly himself, sneaking glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Something about her, even under the mask of the sack, felt familiar, as though their fates had been quietly tied together long before this moment. Days passed, and the woman slowly began to reveal pieces of her story. Her name was Eleanor, she whispered one evening, her voice soft but steady. She had been fleeing a controlling family, one that had sought to trap her in a life she didn't choose. The sack she wore at the auction had been both protection and shame, a barrier between her identity and the world that had tried to control her. Jack listened, captivated by her words. Her courage, her quiet determination, fascinated him more than anything he had ever seen. In return, Jack shared his life with her, how he spent long days in the forest, felling trees, and long nights alone, with only the stars for company. Eleanor listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes thoughtful, and with each story shared, the distance between them lessened. Laughs became more frequent, touches more natural. Even the silence they shared grew comfortable, like an unspoken promise that they were beginning to trust one another. One afternoon, Jack guided her to the edge of the forest, where sunlight danced on the pine needles. He showed her the river where he fished, the cliffs he often climbed, and the cabin that had once been only his sanctuary. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with wonder and relief. She was seeing freedom for the first time, and Jack was there to share it with her. That night, under a sky awash with stars, Jack found himself standing close to Eleanor, his hand brushing hers lightly. The quiet bond between them had grown into something more, something neither had expected. Hesitant but sure, he asked, "Would you stay with me?" Her eyes, visible now as she had removed the sack, shone with tears and a smile. "I'd like that," she whispered. For the first time in his life, Jack felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Their beginnings had been strange, awkward, almost impossible, but love, real, patient love, had taken root. In a cabin once filled only with solitude, laughter and whispers now lingered, and the two of them faced a future full of possibilities, built not from wealth or status, but from trust, courage, and an unexpected connection forged in the most unusual of ways. Spring had settled over the Montana forest, painting the world in fresh greens and golden sunlight. Jack and Eleanor had grown closer with each passing day, their unusual beginnings slowly transforming into a life full of warmth and companionship. Jack's cabin, once a place of solitude, now echoed with laughter and shared stories. The forest, which had always been his only friend, now bore witness to a new kind of life, one built together. Eleanor began to take part in Jack's daily routine, helping him with chores she had never imagined herself doing. She chopped wood alongside him, her movements cautious at first, but gradually confident. She fetched water from the river, her laughter ringing as the sunlight caught her hair. Jack couldn't help but admire her strength, the way she had turned fear and uncertainty into determination. For him, the sight of her working beside him was more beautiful than any sunrise over the mountains. One evening, Jack returned from the forest, his arms sore but his heart light. Eleanor had prepared a small dinner by the fire, the aroma of freshly baked bread filling the cabin. They ate together in companionable silence, occasionally exchanging smiles. The quiet comfort between them was no longer awkward, it was a language of its own. After dinner, they stepped outside to watch the sunset, the sky ablaze with colors that mirrored the warmth growing between them. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began sharing more of her past, opening up about the family she had fled. She spoke of expectations, rules, and restrictions that had made her feel trapped, and Jack listened, never judging, only supporting. In return, he shared his own vulnerabilities, the loneliness of growing up in the woods, the fear that he might never find someone who understood him. In the openness of their conversations, their bond deepened, and a quiet love began to flourish. One particularly serene evening, Jack led Eleanor to a small clearing near the river. Fireflies glimmered around them as the stars began to pepper the sky. He paused, holding her hand, and spoke softly. "I never expected this," he admitted, "but I can't imagine my life without you now." Eleanor's eyes glistened in the firelight. She squeezed his hand, her heart full of the trust and affection she had learned to feel for him. "I feel the same," she said. Jack took a deep breath, his voice steady but tender. "Eleanor, will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide with surprise and joy. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded, a radiant smile breaking across her face. "Yes, Jack, I will," she whispered. That night, under the wide Montana sky, they sat together by the riverbank, imagining a future neither could have planned, yet both knew they wanted. From the strange circumstances of an auction and a sack over her head, their story had blossomed into something real, something enduring. Jack had found more than a companion, he had found love, courage, and a partner who had changed his life forever. And Eleanor had found freedom, safety, and a home in the most unexpected place, Jack's heart. In the quiet of the forest, with the river's gentle murmur and the stars above, their journey was only beginning, and for the first time, both of them felt truly whole. Spring had given way to early summer, and the Montana forest was alive with color. The pines a deep green, wildflowers painting the meadows with splashes of yellow and violet. Jack and Eleanor had been planning their wedding quietly, wanting it to reflect their simple, heartfelt lives rather than the pomp of the townsfolk. The cabin was filled with the scent of fresh pine and wildflowers, decorations Eleanor had gathered from the nearby forest, weaving them into garlands and bouquets. It was modest, but to them, it was perfect. On the morning of the wedding, the sun rose gently over the mountains, spilling gold across the cabin. Jack dressed in his best clothes, a clean shirt, worn but polished boots, and suspenders he hadn't worn in years. Eleanor wore a simple white dress she had stitched herself, delicate and flowing, with a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hand. She looked at Jack with a shy smile, and for the first time, he felt completely at ease. The woman who had once been a stranger with a sack over her head now stood before him, radiant and free. The ceremony was held in a small clearing near the river, where the water sparkled under the morning sun. A few friends from the town had been invited, but the forest itself seemed to be the main witness, tall pines forming a natural cathedral, birds singing as if in celebration. Jack and Eleanor stood facing each other, hands entwined, hearts pounding. The officiant spoke words of love and commitment, but it was the unspoken promise between them, the trust, respect, and shared struggle, that made the moment sacred. When Jack slid the simple ring onto Eleanor's finger, her eyes welled with tears of joy. "I love you," he whispered, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against his. The river's gentle murmur and the soft rustle of leaves were the only witnesses as they sealed their vows with a kiss. Laughter, applause, and quiet sniffles echoed through the clearing as friends cheered, but it was the serene bond between the two of them that defined the moment. After the ceremony, they returned to the cabin for a small celebration. The table was modest, covered with bread, cheese, fruits, and the wildflowers Eleanor had gathered. Jack and Eleanor sat side by side, hands brushing, hearts light. They spoke softly, dreaming aloud about the life they would build together, the cabin filled with warmth, the forest as their playground, the river as their companion. Every challenge Eleanor had faced, every lonely day Jack had endured, now felt like preparation for this moment. As twilight fell, they stepped outside together. The sky blazed with the deep purples and oranges of sunset, reflecting on the river. Fireflies began their nightly dance, and the forest hummed with life. Eleanor rested her head on Jack's shoulder, feeling safe, cherished, and deeply loved. Jack held her close, grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought her into his life. From a dusty auction and a sack over her head to this serene evening under the stars, their journey had been extraordinary. That night, as they lay in their cabin, the forest wrapped around them like a protective embrace, Jack and Eleanor knew that this was only the beginning. Their love had grown out of unusual circumstances, yet it was real, enduring, and unshakable. Together, they would face whatever the world held, hand in hand, heart to heart, in the wild and beautiful Montana wilderness that had witnessed the start of their remarkable story.